J. Wellington Gedge lives with his rich wife, who inherited a fortune from her first husband, at the Château Blissac, near St Rocque, Brittany. She wants them to live in France, although he longs to return to his hometown, Glendale, California. Mrs. Gedge is going on a short trip to London, but has invited some guests: the American Senator Opal and his daughter, and the Vicomte de Blissac. Mrs. Gedge wants them to make Mr. Gedge the American ambassador to France, an idea which appalls Mr. Gedge. At the nearby Hotel des Étrangers are two American criminals: confidence trickster Gordon, Oily, Carlyle, and safe blower, Soup, Slattery. Oily admits that he and his wife, Gumshoe Gertie, had a falling out a year prior. Soup tries to rob Mr. Gedge, but Gedge has no money. They bond over their losses in the stock market crash. Gedge mentions that he was rich when he married and gave his wife $60,000 worth of jewels, which are usually kept in a safe. Soup plans to rob the safe, with Oily acting as the inside man, which they call working the inside stand. American millionaire Packy Franklyn is engaged to the beautiful but austere Lady Beatrice Bracken. He sees his old friend, the fun-loving Vicomte de Blissac. Beatrice wants Packy to befriend the intellectual novelist Blair Eggleston. She is going to see her family in the country and is certain that Packy would get into trouble or hot water of some kind if left to himself. Packy goes to a barber shop, but the staff are on strike. For fun, Packy acts as barber for Senator Ambrose Opal, famous for supporting dry legislation far stricter than the Volstead Act. Packy does a bad job and flees from the angered senator. This upsets Jane, since now her father will be especially unreceptive to the news that she is engaged to the impecunious Blair Eggleston. Packy apologizes to Jane, and encourages Blair to approach Senator Opal, who assumes Blair is his new valet. Jane wants Blair to keep up the act and win the senator's favor. Senator Opal accidentally sent a letter meant for his bootlegger to Mrs. Gedge, and she threatens to publicize it unless he makes Mr. Gedge ambassador. The senator agrees to consent to Jane marrying whomever she likes if she recovers the letter. Packy charters a yacht and follows them to St Rocque to help Jane. Soup. Packy, the Vicomte, in a parrot-like lizard costume, and Mr. Gedge, dressed as an Oriental potentate, enjoy St Rocque's annual fancy dress carnival, the festival of the saint. Packy helps Soup escape the police after a fight, and Soup offers to help him. Both the Vicomte and Mr. Gedge get very drunk at the festival. And the next day, Packy, hoping to help Jane, lies to each man that he mortally injured the other in a brawl. Each man agrees to avoid trouble by having Packy visit the chateau pretending to be the Vicomte. Jane, disappointed in Blair for not helping her obtain the letter, is glad to see Packy. Senator Opal believes Packy is Jane's secret fiancé, and approves since Packy is a millionaire and former Yale football star. While locating the safe in Mrs. Gedge's room, Senator Opal is spotted by Mrs. Gedge's lady's maid Medway. He suspects Medway as a detective, and orders Blair to find out. Oily has befriended Mrs. Gedge under the alias of the Duc de Pont and Dima. Playing their roles, Packy and Oily feign speaking French to each other in front of Mrs. Gedge's secretary, Miss Putnam. Oily recognizes Medway, who is actually Gertie. Mrs. Gedge returns and places her jewels and letter in her safe. But Soup refuses to rob the room while a woman is sleeping there. Packy claims he is a detective and gets Mrs. Gedge to change rooms. Though Miss Putnam, who is actually a detective hired by Mrs. Gedge, knows Packy is lying. Blair, acting on Packy's advice, tells Medway he is a detective to see if she admits to being one. But this causes the thieves Medway and Oily, who have reconciled and planned to betray Soup, to tie him up and leave him in a boathouse for a while. Lady Beatrice appears, hears about Packy and Jane, and ends her engagement to Packy. Soup, who was forced by Senator Opal to sit on a windowsill for hours after being caught burgling, has misgivings about helping the senator but still decides to help Packy get the letter. The Vicomte and Mr. Gedge see each other and happily get drunk again. Packy realizes that he loves Jane but resolves to help her marry Blair anyway. Soup, Oily and Gertie, and Packy and Jane attempt to burgle the safe at about the same time. Gertie knocks out Soup and Oily manages to open the safe. But Kate Putnam shows up with a pistol. Oily and Gertie escape empty-handed. Packy eats the letter before Mrs. Gedge can take it. Soup recognizes her as his old partner in crime, Julia. Packy uses this to blackmail Mrs. Gedge into taking Mr. Gedge back to Glendale, and finds Blair in the boathouse. Blair is finished with Jane's schemes and leaves her. Packy and Jane confess their feelings for each other. Soup, having made off with 5 pieces of jewelry from Mrs. Gedge's safe, decides to retire and start a farm.